Imagine spending 20 years building your retirement. Every paycheck, a little more set aside. Every year, a little more faith placed in the company logo on your badge. Then, on September 26, 2001, Enron chairman Kenneth Lay stood before thousands of employees and told them the company's stock was an incredibly cheap stock. He urged them to keep buying and even encouraged their families to do the same. But behind the scenes, executives already knew Enron was in deep trouble. Just over 2 months later, Enron was bankrupt. 20,000 people lost their jobs. Many lost the retirement savings they'd spent decades building. This isn't just a story about corporate fraud. It's a story about betrayal disguised as leadership. Enron didn't look like a company built on deception. It looked like the future. For 6 consecutive years, Fortune magazine named it America's most innovative company. Wall Street analysts praised it. Business schools studied it. Kenneth Lay, its chairman, cultivated the image of a folksy, church-going Texan, a man who mingled with presidents and gave generously to charity. This is authority bias at work, the tendency to trust people who occupy positions of power, credentials, or visible success, often without questioning the substance behind the image. When a company is celebrated by respected institutions, employees don't just trust the paycheck, they trust the character of the people signing it. Nobody at Enron woke up each morning auditing their CEO's soul. They didn't need to. The reputation did the work for them. That trust was never earned through transparency. It was built on image. And image, once established, becomes something more dangerous than a lie. It becomes a shield. That shield was about to be tested, not by employees asking hard questions, but by executives whose own psychology was already quietly shifting. Jeffrey Skilling didn't arrive at Enron looking to commit fraud. He arrived as a McKinsey consultant obsessed with a single idea, that fear and competition make people perform better. He built a performance review system employees nicknamed Rank and Yank. Twice a year, every employee was graded against their peers. The bottom 15% were routinely fired, regardless of whether the company as a whole was thriving. The psychological effect was immediate. Employees stopped collaborating and started competing, sometimes sabotaging each other to survive. Executives, meanwhile, were rewarded not for sound judgment, but for reported performance. However, that performance was generated. This is the mechanism behind incentive-induced bias. When rewards are tied to outcomes rather than integrity, the brain quietly recalibrates what good means. Success stops being a signal of ethical behavior and starts being the only behavior that matters. Layered on top of this was overconfidence. A well-documented cognitive pattern in which repeated praise and rising status cause people to overestimate their own judgment and underestimate risk. Skilling and his inner circle weren't just running a company, they were absorbing years of applause that told them they could not be wrong. Ethics hadn't been abandoned yet, it had simply stopped being the metric anyone was optimizing for. That quiet shift in what counted as winning set the stage for something far more corrosive. In the early 1990s, Skilling pushed Enron to adopt mark-to-market accounting, a method that allowed the company to record projected future profits from long-term contracts as current earnings, even if the cash hadn't been collected yet. Then came Andrew Fastow, Enron's chief financial officer, who used a web of off-balance sheet special-purpose entities to hide billions of dollars in debt and inflate the appearance of profitability. The technical details of these instruments are less important than what they represent psychologically: normalization of deviance. This concept, identified by sociologist Diane Vaughan in her research on organizational failure, describes how small rule violations, initially flagged as risky, become accepted as routine simply because nothing bad happens right away. Each accounting maneuver that went unpunished made the next one feel less extraordinary. This is moral disengagement, the mental process by which people reframe harmful actions as justified, necessary, or simply the way business works. Executives weren't waking up and deciding to become criminals. They were sliding, one rationalized adjustment at a time, into what psychologists call ethical fading, a state in which the moral dimension of a decision quietly disappears from view, replaced entirely by financial or strategic framing. By the time anyone might have called it fraud, it no longer felt like a moral question at all. It felt like Tuesday. But normalization inside an executive suite is one thing. What happened next moved that psychology directly into the lives of 20,000 people who had no idea anything was wrong. This is where the story stops being abstract. Enron's employees were encouraged, repeatedly and publicly, to hold and even increase their retirement investment in company stock. Many had their 401k plans heavily concentrated in Enron shares, in some cases exceeding 60% of their retirement savings. At the same time, corporate filings later confirmed that top executives, including Kenneth Lay, sold significant amounts of their personal Enron holdings during the period when the company's internal problems were becoming apparent to leadership but not to the public. In August 2001, Enron Vice President Sharon Watkins sent an internal memo to Lay warning that the company's accounting practices could lead to it imploding in a wave of accounting scandals. Her warning went largely unheeded at the executive level. Employees, meanwhile, operated under optimism bias, the well-documented tendency to believe that bad outcomes are less likely to happen to us than the statistics suggest, reinforced continuously by authority bias toward leadership that kept projecting confidence. There was no single moment employees could point to and say, "This is the betrayal." It was quieter than that. It was leadership choosing silence while employees chose faith, and by the time the faith was tested, the shares were worthless. 20,000 people didn't lose their retirement to a market crash. They lost it to a silence that was calculated and a trust that was exploited. The question that remains is almost harder to answer than the betrayal itself. How did an entire organization, lawyers, auditors, board members, watch this happen and do nothing? Enron employed some of the most credentialed professionals in corporate America. Arthur Andersen, one of the Big Five accounting firms, audited its books. A board of respected directors oversaw its operations. Skilled attorneys reviewed its transactions. Almost none of them stopped it. Groupthink offers part of the explanation: the tendency of cohesive groups to suppress dissent in favor of consensus, especially when challenging the group risks, social or professional costs. Diffusion of responsibility compounds this. When many people share oversight of a decision, each individual feels less personally accountable for catching a problem, assuming someone else surely would. Cognitive dissonance played a role too. Professionals who had built careers and reputations around Enron's success faced a psychological cost in acknowledging that the company they'd vouched for might be fraudulent. Rather than confront the discomfort, many engaged in self-justification, unconsciously reframing warning signs as manageable anomalies rather than evidence of systemic collapse. Arthur Andersen was ultimately convicted of obstruction of justice for shredding Enron-related documents, a conviction later overturned on technical grounds by the Supreme Court. But the underlying failure of oversight was never in dispute. Intelligence did not protect anyone. In some ways, intelligence made the rationalizations more sophisticated and therefore more convincing, which leaves the darkest question of all: not why the system failed, but why the individuals at its center chose betrayal in the first place. Strip away the accounting, strip away the legal language. What remains is a group of people who chose repeatedly to protect themselves at the expense of thousands who trusted them. Power played its role, the well-documented psychological pattern in which authority reduces a person's sensitivity to the consequences their decisions have on others. Incentives played theirs, compensation structures that rewarded short-term performance metrics regardless of long-term truth. Identity mattered too. Executives who had spent years being told they were the smartest people in the room found it easier to believe they were right than to believe they were wrong. But underneath all of it was rationalization. The same psychological mechanism present in ordinary people every day, simply operating at a scale most of us will never face. Skilling, Fastow, and Lay did not need to be monsters to do what they did. They needed only a long enough chain of small, self-protective justifications, each one slightly easier to make than the last, until betrayal no longer felt like betrayal. It felt like survival. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted in 2006 on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Andrew Fastow pleaded guilty and testified against his former colleagues. Kenneth Lay was convicted as well, though he died before sentencing. Enron wasn't created by monsters. It was created by ordinary people whose psychology changed one decision at a time. And that is the part that should unsettle you most, because the conditions that built that psychology were never unique to Enron. The pressure to perform, the silence that protects reputations, the trust that goes unquestioned until it's too late. Those forces didn't disappear in 2001. They're still sitting quietly inside boardrooms right now.